that if you're on the terrorist watch list, you shouldn't be able to go buy a weapon. It makes no sense in this country that we say you're too dangerous to board an airplane, but you can go down the street and buy a semi-automatic weapon. And so I hope members of this great committee, you'll also pass that common sense measure, trying to pass that at the federal level, but always proud of the state of Maryland for leading in these efforts to save lives. And I appreciate the committee's attention. Thank you.
The bill that is before you, HB1000, this bill only says that a person may not get a permit to carry a concealed firearm if you are on the terrorist watch list. It's a banner day for me, again, because I find myself for the first time here testifying on the same side of an issue as the editorial boards of the Washington Post, USA Today, Los Angeles Times, and the Boston Globe, in arguing that the terrorist watch list maintained by the National Counterterrorism Center is not an appropriate list to use to deny people their constitutional rights. You cannot deny someone a constitutional right based on their inclusion on a secret government list.
I just have a question, since you're a federal elected official, and you can answer, because I'm, and I know people are going to come up and testify later, but they might not have the knowledge on this that you have as far as the terrorist watch list one. Right now, if somebody, because it's a federal, totally federal, the state doesn't have anything to do with it right now as far as who gets on there. In fact, I don't know if the state of Maryland even knows who's on there or can get that. But is that right now, is that purely an executive branch function in that Department of Homeland Security or the president or somebody decide, they are the ones that put people on the list? As Congress, do you have any function, or the judiciary branch? Does anyone else have any role in that?
I don't see any reason why the state of Maryland cannot take the position that here in our state, if you're on that list, we don't want you buying guns in the state of Maryland.
The process for being placed on this list is that someone in one of the nominating agencies, which includes FBI, Homeland Security, CIA, Interpol, et cetera, has a reasonable suspicion that you either are involved in or are connected to terrorist activity. That is not even the same standard to be arrested. Perhaps that's the reason why, if these people are so dangerous, they're not actually being arrested, because they don't have enough evidence to meet probable cause.
Is there, if you end up on that list, do the, and I ask because it's a federal list, so most of the state lawmakers are coming up, and the folks here aren't going to have the knowledge you have about this. How do I, if I'm on that list, can I go to court and challenge? I mean, where's the due process on that list? Yeah,
fair enough. There's a process by which you approach the federal law enforcement agencies and say that if you believe your name has been wrongly put on that list, and make the case. But so long as that list is deemed to be a list of people who pose a risk, a serious risk, a potential terrorist threat to the United States, it seems to me, if we're saying you can't get on an airplane, we should also say you can't go buy a semi-automatic weapon.
Yeah, I guess it's just the question is the due process about it, is figuring out if you get put on a list solely by the executive branch, if you can go to the judiciary and be taken off the list. And being on a plane or drivers, those are all different, but we're talking about constitutional rights and due process, and obviously the Second Amendment is a constitutional right. It's just lastly, I guess that's my concern. I'd be interested, as a member of the legislative branch, as I am, your take on it, because I'm always worried about the executive branch and the creeping power of executive branch. And especially nowadays, you look at this current campaign, there's talks about taking people who are allowing Muslims to immigrate in and things like that. I mean, there's, basically allowing the executive branch to create a list, and then the state of Maryland saying whoever they put on that list, we won't give Second Amendment rights to. I mean, what if somebody said, anyone who's a Muslim, we're going to stick them on that list? I mean, it sounds far-fetched, but watching this campaign, it's hard to believe that it is. I mean, you get all kinds of things. That's why we have a check and balance in our system. So, I mean, just somebody in the legislative branch, don't you have pause about the executive having that kind of power?
The process for redress, should you find out that you're on this list, let's say you're denied boarding on an airplane. If you were denied boarding because you're on the no-fly list, a subset of the greater, much larger terrorist watch list, you would fill out a form with the Transportation Security Administration, which would then be reviewed by executive branch officials, and then reviewed by more executive branch officials. And at some point, and apparently the latest average that I was able to find was 67 days, you would get an answer as to whether or not your inclusion on that list was appropriate or not. Maybe. You might, as in the case of Dr. Rahima Ibrahim, who was not a US citizen, but is a classic example of this list, spend 10 years in federal court attempting to have your name removed from the list and never find out the actual reason why your name was included in the first place, because that information was redacted from all of the available court records. You also, by the way, would not be allowed to attend your own hearings in federal court because you would be denied a visa to enter the US.
As you know, we grant the FBI the ability to, especially in the realm of terrorism, international terrorism, to look at the information and make judgments about who poses a risk. Yes, there is a process for getting your name off that list.
Is it solely going to the executive branch?
And that is important. I believe you can go seek redress in court, but the reality is I'm not disagreeing with you on the need for a clear due process mechanism.
Once your name is on that list, which is, by the way, classified, you have no way of finding out that your name is on it. You have no way of finding out if your name is not on it. It is, by the way, a federal crime to attempt to purchase a firearm knowing that you are prohibited. And if I were to decide tomorrow that I wanted to go purchase a new firearm and wanted to make sure that I wasn't on the terror watch list before I made that purchase, and I called up the FBI and I said, hey, am I on the terror watch list? They would laugh at me because you don't tell terrorists they're being investigated.
Just from your experience, do you know how long it takes if somebody is put on the list? Have you had people, constituents, contact your office and say, I've been wrongly put on this list? Do you know how long it's taken for them to get off the list? Is there a...
I don't know if there's an average amount of time. I don't know the specific wait periods. What I do know is that there are people who have, challenged their names being on that list, and they're able to get their names off the list. And as I said, based on all the information I have, very few people whose names are actually on the list contest it. You're absolutely right. For those who feel they're wrongly put on the list, there needs to be a process, and there is a process, and maybe we can improve upon that
I just
process.
need to learn what that is. Yeah.
But there are also, as I say, the overwhelming majority of people who are on that list are not seeking to be removed.
Other persons of note whose names have been included on both the no-fly list and the terrorist watch list include the Bolivian President Evo Morales, U.S. Army Colonel and Democratic candidate for Congress Robert Johnson, Senator Ted Kennedy, pop singer Cat Stevens, whose name was then later changed to Yusuf Islam, Representative McClintock, current congressman and former state senator who found out he was on the list when he was in the state legislature, and most interestingly, a person whose name was on the terror watch list until a bill had to be passed to have his name removed from it, Nelson Mandela.
Concerns. I found an interesting article from the Huffington Post from a couple years ago about how do you end up on a terrorist watch list. And there's several interesting things. Of course, there are some credible ways where you could obviously be suspected of terror for a variety of very credible reasons. But there's also, you could be in a category of people that are determined to be a threat, and that would be determined by one of the assistants to Homeland Security just deciding that a category of individuals should be added. You could be, if you post something on social media that someone at the FBI finds or someone at Homeland Security finds to be suspicious. I have to be honest, spending some time on social media myself, there's a lot of folks who post things that maybe could be a little bit nutty on both sides, and I don't know that that they should be added to the terror watch list, but there are cases where this has happened. We don't use the state police don't want to use federal background checks as a reason to authorize someone if you clear that background check, because even though that's a federal system, why would we want to use something that's even more imperfect than a federal background check to decide whether someone can exercise a constitutional right or not? I just wanted to give you an opportunity to comment.
Sure, and I appreciate that. And as I said earlier, there is a process to get your name removed, and as part of constituent services that we work with you on, if there's anybody that you know that believes their name is wrongly on that list, we're happy to work with you to try to get it removed.
This is not a list that one gets on or off through an adversarial process. And in order to genuinely respect due process, the opportunity to petition for redress must be an adversarial process. In every other instance of a person being denied their constitutional right to own a firearm, they have been through a judicial process. Felons have been convicted through a court proceeding. Persons who have been convicted of misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence have been through a court proceeding. Persons who have been adjudicated, and I'm going to use the federal government term here, I don't particularly like the term myself, but persons who have been adjudicated mentally defective, which is the federal term used in the law, have been through a courtroom process. They have had an opportunity to present evidence in their own defense, and they have had an opportunity to confront their accuser. Being on this list does not include any of those things, nor does the redress process for getting your name off the list. It is an entirely bureaucratic executive branch employee-based process.
Perhaps we can improve on it, but it seems to me, in the interest of public safety here, we'd want to err on the side of public safety. Let me just say, my understanding is there has to be some individualized reason to be on the list. Okay. It can't be, ethnic profiling or religious profiling. So I didn't want people to be left with that impression. Okay. And to the extent that people are looking at some social media and see chatter and determine that someone may pose a risk, that's probably, in some cases, a good reason at least to get on the list. In fact, we now know that if the intelligence agencies had been able to detect some of the back and forth social media, we could have detected the San Bernardino killers in advance. Mm-hmm. So the fact that somebody, you may be getting information from people's statements on social media, in my view, so long as you're collecting that information in a manner that's legal, that may be cause.
And I don't have a problem with them doing. I don't have a problem
Yeah.
with them doing that. I just think it's important to note it is very easy to just get added to the list, kind of as this person. I mean, it's not like a complicated procedure to get added to this list. So in some ways, so that's the concern I have. But I thank you for answering my question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Final point I have to make is that this list is comprised of names, not identities. It is not a list that includes identifying factors other than your name. Names are shared by many people. Names are misspelled. Names are mistranslated from foreign languages. How many different ways are there to spell Gaddafi? This list is not an appropriate standard to use when you're talking about denying someone a constitutional right. It requires someone to prove a negative in order to obtain a carry permit. You would have to prove that you are not on the list, which again, I can't call up the FBI and say, hey, am I on the terrorist watch list, and have them go, no, you're fine. In fact, I might get myself put on the watch list for calling to ask to see if I'm on the watch list.